Csaba Szabó is a historian specializing in ancient history and religious studies in the Danubian provinces in the Roman Empire. Born in Satu Mare, Romania, he has studied history and archaeology at the University of Cluj before becoming a Ph.D. at the University of Pécs in Hungary. His research focuses on the Roman cult of Mithras, the archaeology of religion in the Danubian provinces during the Principate period, and the religious history of Dacia. Through his work, he explores the intersection of religion and society in the Roman Empire, especially in Eastern Europe. Since launching his blog in 2012, Roman Religion, Szabó has written thousands of entries and actively engages in broad audience through social media platforms. His online presence fosters interest in ancient history, sparkling discussions and making his expertise accessible beyond academia. He has worked with the new Mithraeum on several occasions, contributing articles and more. His work bridges the gap between scholarly research and public understanding, offering a valuable scientific forum for both enthusiasts and professionals. We have had the pleasure of discussing the cult of Mithras in Hispania with Jaime Alvar and in Gallia with Laurent Bricault. So now it's your turn, Szabó, to tell us more about Mithras in Dacia. How are you doing?
Hello, nice to see you. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Thanks to you for accepting that. Actually, we follow you. We follow your articles, and we are very, very pleased to have you here in the new Mithraeum. But before we dive into details, could you tell us what initially drew you to focus on ancient Rome, and in particular on the cult of Mithras?
Yeah, so the story begins when I begin my faculty of history at the University of Cluj in Cluj, in Romania. Of course, Cluj is famous for having a very long history of Roman studies as one of the intellectual and university centers of Transylvania, where the Dacian province was present. So, of course, it's natural that at the university they are teaching Roman archaeology for a very long period now, almost a century. And Roman archaeology is also present in Transylvania for a very long time. So it was natural that most of the students of archaeology and history are specializing in Roman archaeology, Roman studies. So this was somehow a natural path. But it was also an accident that in 2008, I participated as a student during an excavation in Porolissum, in the northern part of Dacia, the former province of Dacia, where they excavated with a German-Romanian team. And the professor who was the leader of the excavation told us that we are excavating a Mithraeum inside the Roman fort. Unfortunately, it turns out that it was not a Mithraeum, which we suspected, honestly, that it's something else. It was a water reservoir, a cisternium. But for my research after 2008, it was a decisive moment that I began to read a lot about Mithras because of this false flag excavation. So somehow an accidental excavation turned me to focus on the material of Sarmisegetusa, which became my research focus for my bachelor studies, and later during my master studies, I was working on the Mithraic material of Apulum, one of the largest Roman cities in the province of Dacia. So this was my path to follow up the material of Dacia, and also a bit later I broadened my interest for the rest of the provinces, mostly in Central Eastern Europe.
In general, people are familiar with the Western Roman Empire through countless documentaries, books, films, and series, but the Eastern provinces remain largely overlooked. Could you provide us some historical background on this part of the empire?
So the Danubian provinces, we usually say that it's the northeastern part or northern part of the Roman Empire. And of course, it has a very difficult and long history, which is impossible to summarize shortly. But it was conquered by Rome in several phases. The first part, Rhaetia, Noricum, and part of Pannonia, was conquered by Augustus Tiberius, but became really integrated in the empire only during the Flavian period. The similar history happened with Mysia, which became part of the empire in the 1st century AD. Dacia is somehow an exception because it's one of the last provinces of the Roman Empire. It's a very late comer in the long list of provinces, and it was conquered by Trajan, Emperor Trajan. Of course, it was an attempt already by Diocletian, Emperor Diocletian, Emperor Domitianus, who tried to conquer Dacia in the 1st century, but it was an unsuccessful attempt. And Emperor Trajan was the one who realized this conquest, who finished this conquest in 2 wars, the First and the Second Dacian War. And in 106 AD, the province of Dacia, the later province of Dacia, became part of the Roman Empire. And it remained there till 270, 275, when the province was abandoned by Aurelian. So less than 165 years when the province was part of the Roman Empire. A very short period, but it was the peak of the empire when Dacia became a part of it. And it produced a lot of very valuable and interesting archaeological and religious material.
That's about history, right? But what about the religious landscape in Dacia? Can you tell us more? You are a specialist on that. What can you tell us about it?
So yeah, the religious landscape of Dacia is very interesting because, as I said, it was conquered very late. The other particularity of this province, in contrast with the other Danubian provinces and the other parts of the Roman world, that we don't really have evidence for the pre-Roman religion in the Roman time. So it seems that the indigenous population, the Dacians, several tribes are known from ancient sources like Ptolemy, the geography of Ptolemy, and other later ancient sources. We know that the former kingdom of the Dacians were formed by several other tribes, but we don't know much about their religion. In contrast with Pannonia, for example, or Noricum, where we have a lot of indigenous religious traditions coexisting in Roman time. Unfortunately, the pre-Roman tradition is missing, completely missing from Dacia, which is one of the, with the historiography call it the Dacian paradox, because it's hard to explain why a religious tradition, which probably existed for centuries before the Romans, suddenly disappeared. There's absolutely no trace of Dacian religion surviving after 106 AD. So this is one of the particularities of Dacia. The other particularity is that the province is a mixture of groups arriving from everywhere. There are people coming from the east. There are people coming from the neighboring provinces, Pannonia, Mysia Superior, Mysia Inferior. Also, a lot of people from Asia Minor, from the Greek-speaking world, especially Anatolia, Asia Minor, but also from the West. There are people coming from the Celtic world, from Gallia, from Hispania. During the Antonine period, there is a very intense mobility between Roman Dacia and Mauritania in North Africa, also Libya, the northern African provinces. So there is a huge mobility of soldiers and merchants, and they are coming, of course, with their religious traditions. So Dacia, in this short 165 years, produced almost 1,500 votive inscriptions. This is a huge quantity of epigraphic material, much more than Noricum, today Austria, or other smaller provinces in the region. So this huge quantity is produced by a very short period, less than 160 years, by people coming from all over the empire. So it's not a local elite who is producing it, but the incomers, the newcomers. It was like California in the 19th century, the land of hope, the land of unlimited possibilities for many people of the Roman Empire. So it was a new land, one of the last conquered free lands of the Roman Empire. So there were many people, as Eutropius said, ex toto orbe Romano, so from all over the Roman world, people were coming in the province, and they bring it together a very rich religious tradition. So we have Eastern, Greek, Celtic, Illyrian, and many other traditions.
Great. Probably you read already the interview that we did to Jaime Alvar. He has suggested that the cult of Mithras may have landed in Hispania through envoys from Rome, indicating a deliberate rather than a spontaneous development. Do you think a similar process occurred in the Eastern Empire? How did the cult of Mithras take root in Dacian province?
This is one of the big questions, of course, not only for Dacia, I would say, but for many other provinces in the Danubian region, in the northeastern part of the empire, because the first phase of the Mithraic cult, we know that certainly it must be from one of the big religious centers of the empire, probably Rome. I mean, this is now considered as one of the big possibilities. Not 100% sure, of course, but it's really plausible that the cult was formed in one of the intellectual centers of the empire. It could be Rome or Ostia or somewhere there. But how it ended in Dacia, this is a big problem, because when the cult was formed, between 60 and 90, so somewhere between Nero and Nerva, this is the period when the cult is created. Dacia was not yet a province. So in that part of the Roman world, we don't have any evidence of the cult of Mithras. Only in Mysia Inferior, we have one of the earliest epigraphic attestations of the cult in Nove, which is on the land of the Danube, on the bank of the Danube, but not north of the Danube. So the cult must arrive after Trajan conquered the province. And the problem is with this huge material we have, more than 300 objects from Dacia, that it's really hard to date. So the chronology of the monuments is not perfectly clear. We do have monuments from the Hadrianic period. So we have some monuments which is dated from the Hadrianic period, but that doesn't tell us how it arrived. So it seems that most of the people who are worshipping Mithras in the second century, first half of the second century, are soldiers. And there is also a community of civilian group in Sarmisegetusa. But it's really hard to argue that the merchants or the portorium, the members of the costume system, those who are in charge to collect the taxes, for example, there are many theories. In the 19th, 20th century, they argued, for example, Peskov and Tóth István and many other authors, that the costume system, the staff of the costume system, the Publicum Portorium Illyricum, was the responsible for the spread of the cult. Of course, this can be one argument, but the army could be another important factor. Dacia was a very militarized province, so it could be that the military staff, the elite of the military, was the responsible for this. The problem is that we don't have clear evidence for a diffusion theory. We just have material from the Hadrianic period onwards, and it's really hard to see who is the key person, who are the key persons.
All right. In your studies, what unique features have you identified in the cult of Mithras within the Dacian province compared to other regions?
As Mithraic cult is not a centralized cult, not like the Eleusinian mysteries, which has a central temple, or even the Dolihenus, Jupiter Dolihenus, which is very strictly related to the mother sanctuary in Dolihe in Anatolia. The cult of Mithras is decentralized. There is no center, one big center of Mithraic cult. So it's like very similar to the Jewish diaspora in the Roman Empire, with several synagogues, with several small groups. So it's normal that in Dacia we have several Mithraic communities, and each community is shaping the Mithraic narrative, the visual material, to their own language. What is very particular, and this might answer your previous question, that some iconographic features shows a very direct Italic connection. For example, we have some reliefs in Dacia where Sol, the sun god, is represented with 7 sunbeams, but one of the sunbeams is very long. It's particularly pointing to Mithras, showing to the tauroctony. So this particular aspect of the soul of the sun god is known mostly from Italian frescoes. So this seems to be that it's a transport directly from Italy to Dacia. Another thing which is particular, I wouldn't say necessarily unique, but it's a very particular Dacian thing, is the small round relief. They are portable, very small round reliefs, which seems to be produced mostly not only in Dacia, but in the region, Dacia and Murcia, the 2 provinces of Murcia. And it seems that it's a local specificity. We don't know where exactly and who decided to create these objects, but it's one of the particularities of the cult that they produced small objects to be transported even home. So this is a very interesting aspect on the question of the private cult of Mithras, because as Richard Gordon argued in his 2004 article on the miniature objects of Mithras, there are many object types, for example, gemstones, different amulets, different portable objects, where we have Mithraic iconography, which shows that this cult might have also a private aspect, or somehow they use the symbol of Mithras as also as an apotropaic or other function. So this is also one particularity, that we have a lot of round marble objects. Not a lot, but it seems to be a local feature. Another is, for example, Cautes, the representation of one of the torchbearers, holding a bucranium, holding the head of a bull. So Cautes, with the head of the bull in his shoulder, it's again a very typical Dacian iconography. We have at least 4 case studies from Dacia for this representation, and one, very strangely, very far from Dacia in Germania, in Boppard, which is, we don't know, of course, how it ended up there, but it's a very late example. So it might be, again, that the military is taking these objects to another province. So these are just some features. But as every province, every Mithraic community is functioning as a microcosmos. So they have their own visual narrative. They cherry picking the big, let's say, iconographic repertoire of Mithras, and they creating their own religious language inside the sanctuary.
There is also a tauroctony, a relief with Mithras killing the bull, and there is like a small figure that is flying there, and it's not. I have read about that. Do you know? I think it's from Dragus. What does this little human being flying in there in the middle means?
Well, this is one of the case studies where we would need the text. And we don't have it, unfortunately, as we know that there's no interpretation of Mithraic text preserved, like Eubulos or Pallas. We know that they were writing these texts in the 2nd century, probably, but it's lost. So without these interpretative texts, we just can presume that there are some small elements, so-called minor gods, in the Mithraic pantheon. We know from the Duisburg relief and many other complex reliefs from the northern provinces, Germania, but also in Dacia, that there are not only the major divinities, Sol and Luna, Mithras, Saturnus, Oceanus, but there are also minor divinities in the pantheon, in the story of Mithras. And one of these minor divinities, minor figures, could be Lucifer, the star of the morning star, which is, of course, it's hard to interpret. We have similar figures flying next to Sol, or the quadriga of Sol in one of the Mithraic reliefs in Germanic lands. But exactly this kind of figure seems to be is unique. We don't have any similar figures. We have a flying figure with a torch in front of Sol, for example, in the San Stefano di Rotondo relief in Rome. So we have these flying small figures. It looks like a Cupido, but it could be also a Lucifer. So it's somehow related to the Venus cult. It's related perhaps to the initiation grade of the nymphus, but it's really hard to argue exactly what it means. This is the biggest questions when we have such unique case studies or anomalies, iconographic anomalies, because we don't know what was the owner or the person who ordered this relief, what was it thinking? It could be, of course, a very simple provincial answer that they didn't have enough space, so they make the relief more compact, and instead of the quadriga and Cupido, they make this very simple representation. But we just don't know. It's a unique representation, the relief of Dragu, from the northern part of Dacia.
All right, so Lucifer or Cupido, maybe, we don't know exactly, but that gives room to a lot of like interpretations and misinterpretations as well. And actually, I'm pretty sure that there is a lot of misinterpretations about Roman religious practices, and in particular about the cult of Mithras. Can you tell us some of the recurrent one that you have encountered?
So, of course, the cult is very popular, so there's also many misinterpretations or false interpretations. One repeating issue is they constantly cite in some articles or popularizing websites that if there would be no Christianity, today the world would be Mithraic, as a famous quote from Ernst Renan, of course. The problem is this is probably not true, because the Mithraic cult, by definition, was an exclusivist cult, which means that only, as far as we know, only men were part of this cult. So half of the society was excluded. So it's really hard to say that it had the chance ever to grow a universal religion. The other issue, of course, that the number of people who were able to attend such a group, as we know all from the Mithraea in the Roman Empire, we have almost 150 sanctuaries excavated now, but all of them are relatively small. So 15, 20, maybe 40%, the largest ones might have 20, 30 persons, but in the best case, in the peak of the cult, we might have 10,000, 20,000 members in the whole Roman Empire of 50 million people. So one of the misinterpretations that this is a mass movement, this is a large movement in the Roman Empire. It was never a large movement. It was a very small minority, 10, 20,000 people in 50 million. So we can imagine that it's basically the number of politicians in Europe, in whole Europe today. So it's a very small group of people. But of course, they are very visible. They are very visible in the landscape. They are very visible in the religious landscape because of this particular iconography. They're very unique iconography, so it's easy to distinguish from the other cults.
Now, can you share some examples of a recent archaeological discovery or historical insight that has modified our understanding? You have talked a little bit about some misconceptions, but things that in recent archaeology have give us some new clues or that you find particularly exciting or controversial?
Of course, there are many new excavations. There's almost every 5-10 years a new Mithra found. Of course, it's not one of the most common discoveries in the Roman world. So it's always a big celebration when there is a new sanctuary found, because, for example, in Hungary, in the last 40 years, there were only 3 sanctuaries discovered in 40 years. One was in Aquincum, in the house of the Laticlavus, Tribunus Laticlavi. There was another one in Szombathely in Savaria, and recently there was a sanctuary again in Aquincum, but in the military town. And this sanctuary is also very particular because it had painted altars. So very interesting that it shows that a very small sanctuary had painted objects. So it somehow shows that many of the iconographic material we might have was actually not in stone. They didn't have reliefs, but probably some of the iconographic sources were painted, or it could be from other organic materials too. So this is just a glimpse into a world which is probably lost, unfortunately, in most of the cases. The paintings, the small objects, the organic objects. We have many bronze objects, very small bronze objects, which were portable. For example, we have a famous representation of the Tauroctony from Brigacio, which is a bronze plaque. It must be somehow used on the body of a member, or it was put on one of the altars. We don't know exactly how they used it, but these objects are very interesting that it shows that the microcosmos of this sanctuary are very rich in objects. There are many functionalities of objects which we might reanalyze. So these new discoveries, the new sanctuaries, are always telling us a lot about the everyday life of a sanctuary, or the archaeology of the sanctuaries, how these objects were used, where these objects were used, what was the functionality of different objects, or even pottery, for example. The richest sanctuaries, of course, are full with ceramic material. There are many sanctuaries which shows a lot about the events, the feasts, the banquets. Of course, the most famous one is in Tienen in Belgium, with this large gathering for almost 100 persons united there, probably outside the sanctuary, which is, again, raised the question if such a Mithraeum had also public events, because this was also one of the big questions, if they had only private events, in closed door events, or they were visible also for the rest of the society. So how visible is a Mithraic group? And the event in Tienen might have a clue, or might give us a clue that there might be some events in the Mithraic communities which are visible for the rest of the people. So these are just some particularities from the rest 20-25 years of discoveries about very particular interesting objects. Or recently, Laurent Bricault and Richard Gordon published a very interesting amulet, or a small medallion, which has a very interesting inscription, somehow protecting, helping the owner of this very particular reused coin. It's a reused coin with a Mithraic iconography. So this is also showing, again, the private aspect of the cult.
Looking ahead, what emerging questions in the study of the cult of Mithras do you think will be particularly significant over the next, let's say, 10 years?
Well, 10 years, I don't know. Of course, it was 2004 when Roger Beck published his article about the perspectives of the study of Mithras. So he was in 2004 predicting that in the next 10-15 years, the Mithraic studies will focus on cognitive studies. Of course, he was personally interested in this, so this is why probably he somehow proposed that the research focus of the decade will be cognitive studies, and of course he was right. Many of the researchers now are focusing on the cognitive aspects of Mithras. It's one of the booming fields of religious studies and also ancient religious studies, that people try to understand how the sensorial landscape of Mithraeum was looking like. And I would say that, of course, in the 21st century, in the second or third decade now of the 21st century and the following years, AI and the artificial intelligence, different digital techniques are allowing us, for example, to reconstruct more vividly, more perfectly, more interestingly, virtual digital sanctuaries of Mithras. So it would be very exciting to see new museums, new exhibitions with digital or reconstructions of a sanctuary, where objects are not only 3D as we have already in museums, but they are somehow moving around us. So it's a very sensorial, I think sensorial museology will have a big boom in the field. But this is, of course, only in the presentation of the cult, how this research field is presented for the greater public. Regarding the research, of course, we're still lacking a new catalog of Mithras. I mean, your website, of course, contributes a lot to this, to update as much as it's possible the large amount of material we have after Vermasseren. But the last systematic archaeological catalog published is still in 1960. So that would be a very important project, a European enterprise, a European project for several authors or several research centers to unite, to have an international project focusing on a new catalog. Of course, unfortunately, international research, European Research Council is not financing anymore corpora studies. It's not sexy anymore to publish big corpus and an archaeological catalog. But this could be, of course, somehow presented in a sociological study. So objects are today in the post-processual archaeological era are not just individual objects. The objects are also entities, agencies, if you want. They interact with people. People are interact with objects. So this catalog can be presented with a very detailed sociological analysis, which is also missing in some provinces. So the research should focus on the local material, detailed case studies of local material, new sanctuaries, new excavations if possible. Of course, this is possible only if they found a new Mithraeum, which, well, not easy, but I hope that there are still around some Mithraea, but this is, of course, it always coming in surprise. But the already existing material offers us also the perspective of new sociological analysis, but also a digital catalog perhaps would be very useful.
Great, that's a very good news. I will love to have like a more comprehensive the new Mithraeum, to be honest, catalog, and of course that will be really interesting. One of the things that you have done very successfully is to engage with a broad audience through social media. What do you find the most effective in making ancient history accessible to non-specialists? And there are specific topics or discoveries that that had resonated most with your followers?
Well, I'm not a specialist in social media, so of course there are many historians who are more successful. Like recently I read an article that there are historians like Tom Holland, who has thousands and hundreds of thousands of followers on his Spotify, or there are YouTube channels like Religion for Breakfast, for example, is a wonderful project. They are incredibly successful. But what I said, my aim was only to make a summary, to collect all the information on Roman religious studies, because in the last 10, 15 years, there is an incredible amount of literature produced. We are living, unfortunately, in the age of publish and perish. So there are hundreds of researchers now in Europe, in the United States, and now even in the global South, more and more scholars focusing on Roman religion. I think I found the niche, I found that field which is not covered yet in the social media, and that was to present the results, the latest research results for the greater public. Posting photos, book covers, some interesting questions. When I was going in museums, for example, or archaeological parks, they're very popular. It seems that people like to see authentic photos from museums, from temporary exhibitions, from archaeological parks. And especially, and I would say that this is a new element in the last 1-2 years, that as everyone knows, Facebook and now even Twitter, maybe Instagram or not yet, more and more polluted by AI images, which is absolutely horrible for archaeology. There are hundreds of fake objects in our social media now, which is revolting for us. So I think such websites or such platforms where we promote real knowledge, real objects, real archaeology, real antiquity, it will be more valuable. I hope that people will realize that maybe an AI-generated mosaic from Turkey is very attractive, but it's fake. It's not our reality. It's not what we found if we leave this Black Mirror. So it's, I think this is a very important aim for all of us who are dealing now with popularizing science, or popular archaeology, public archaeology, or whatever we name it. It's important that we share authentic objects, authentic information, because soon people will be very thirsty for that, because our online existence is completely polluted now with all kind of fake information.
And talking about concerns, you have already, as you were saying, about all these issues with artificial intelligence in social media, etc. You have also expressed a few times concerns about how academia often prioritizes certain topics over others. Is there an aspect of your research that you feel is unappreciated, or that you would like to see to receive more attention?
I mean, research is should be free. That's important. That in an ideal world, and of course we know that we are not living in an ideal world, but in an ideal world, research is free. So everybody is free to research what they want. But unfortunately, we know that it's not like that. So nowadays, some research branches, some research themes and topics and buzzwords are very popular, and I think that many important aspects of the research, like what we call basic research, basic study of objects, for example, a catalog, for example, is not popular today. But also we are going more far and far from the sources, which is a very strange aspect. I was reading studies and books on Mithras where ancient sources are almost completely ignored, and there are just new theories, there's new social theories, anthropological interpretations, all kind of modern theories, which is fantastic, and it might give us some new aspects, but the reader will ask, where is antiquity in this whole debate? So I think what I concern sometimes that humanities, let's say politely, selling itself for surviving, and it's not it's not necessarily a good method. That we, of course, it's good to be open-minded for all kind of interdisciplinary debate, to integrate in our research the results of genetical studies in archaeology. Of course, it's not going with Mithras, but with AI, with cognitive studies, with digital archaeology, with digital humanities, and so on. But let's not lose our ground field, which is about the sources, the archaeology, the material culture of religion, because that's what we have. That we cannot speak about all kind of modern social theories without the real sources, because then we are doing contemporary history or something completely different. So this is my concern, that I feel sometimes that humanities generally, and not only religious studies, humanities generally is going in a strange direction of over theoretizing our material.
I see what you mean. Well, we will be talking with you for a very long time, but we wanted to keep that a little bit, and also appreciate your time. So just one more question. Can you share with us some of the projects you are working actually with us?
I recently published an article where I tried to reinterpret the largest Mithraeum hoard of objects, let's say. We can consider it also a Mithraeum treasure of Sarmisegetusa, because it's a very interesting case. that more than 160 Mithraeum objects were found in a sanctuary. It was published in 1886, last time in Hungarian, so it's hardly accessible to the greater public and even the academic public. So I wrote a long article where I try to reinterpret this material or to put in a historiographic context. I'm always working on smaller objects now, so like individual objects. I will publish hopefully soon a Mithraeum statue base, or more like a column base, with a very interesting representation, Mithras riding the bull. So it's not a new object, but I recently refound it in a very bad condition, unfortunately. So it's worth to be published with new photographs. So these are the recent studies, but of course, I'm working together with many colleagues from Serbia, with Austria now, on the material of other cities in the Danubian provinces, which will hopefully be published. But this is a long-term project, proposal, more like a proposal, and we will see how this will work. And one of my long-term aims, I don't know when I will have the time for that, is to publish somehow a collection of studies on Mithras in Roman Dacia, to have finally a book on Mithras, because I don't have a proper book on Mithras. All my books are something about something else, like sanctuaries in Dacia or religion in the Danubian provinces, but I don't have a proper book on Mithras. But I'm always arguing that if Richard Gordon, the most well-known and most appreciated historian of Mithraeum studies, has no monograph on Mithras, it's not a tragedy.
Well, let's hope for that monograph on Mithras, as you were saying. We will love to have that in our hands and read it and appreciate and know more about history in Dacia and Mithras in Dacia. So thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate, and let's hope to talk to you soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you.